Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Taking a look here at the consumer confidence number, Paul, that you just referenced, it unexpectedly fell in January to a 4-month low. And the reason, the labor market and the outlook for the broader economy. So let's go and get more on this right now with Stephanie Guichard, senior economist at the Conference Board. Can you walk us through this lack of confidence, Stephanie?
So I wouldn't call it a lack of confidence. True, our index declined for the second consecutive month. However, if you look at it for the past 2 years, it's been stuck in this narrow range, and it's not breaking free, nor on the upside, nor on the downside. So indeed, this month there was a decline, but it's more like a correction from the very strong index we saw in October and November. So it's just, to us, it's just a correction, and it's driven by consumers' assessments of the present situation, which has been downgraded slightly.
What's historically for this measurement, Stephanie? What's kind of the key drivers for consumer sentiment here? What's really been kind of pushing this over the last year or two?
I think it's really the labor market. So for the past 2 years, consumers have been very happy with the current situation on the labor market. I mean, we all know employment has been relatively low. There are plenty of jobs, a bit less than just after the pandemic, but still plenty of jobs available. So consumers are happy about the present situation. They are worried about the future because they all know that good things don't last forever. So you have these two drivers, happy about the current labor market, worried about where it's going. And this has been really driving our index for the past 2 years.
All right, Stephanie, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Stephanie Guichard joining us from the Conference Board. Thank you.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Let's get back to the municipal market. We are at BAM Mutual offices down in Lower Manhattan, Build American Mutual, talking about the municipal bond industry. Tom Doe joins us of Municipal Markets Analytics. Municipal bond market, it's an active market. Talk to us about 2024 in terms of new issuance, Tom, and kind of what you guys think about 2025.
Well, there was record issuance, as you point out, in 2024. Tremendous access to the market. We think there's going to be continued high issuance going forward. We actually think that in the next 10 years that we'll see municipal issuance reach $1 trillion a year versus $500 billion last year.
Whoa, and the buyers are all there.
Yes. And it's predominantly individuals through funds, ETFs, and in direct purchases.
Some of the Trump administration, President Trump himself, is saying that perhaps as it relates to infrastructure spending, maybe even disaster relief spending, that some of the spending should be more at the state and local level versus the federal level. How does your market think about that?
I couldn't agree more with that perspective. In fact, a year ago, almost to the day, I testified before the Senate Budget Committee and made those points. Senator Braun from Indiana, who is now governor in Indiana, championed that. I think that the states and local governments have the capacity, debt capacity, to take on, can take on more, and it's right for them to have that local oversight for disaster relief. So I think it's a win-win. I think that we have more control at the state and local level. The federal government takes some of that responsibility off their books. So I think it's a real opportunity actually for the municipal industry. What Trump was saying in Project 2025 for regarding FEMA.
What other issues out of D.C. or headlines out of D.C. are you guys in the muni market monitoring this year?
Well, the municipal market is kind of a fear-based market because everybody's looking at the exemption drives everything. Mm-hmm. And so there's a great...
As in, like, that might go away, and then therefore...
Exactly. And so everyone thinks, oh, my God, from a mutual fund manager, you'll be talking to some later today. And they go, my God, if it's not a tax-exempt market, well, what do we do with our business? Mm-hmm. I think And who knows how to handicap that? I mean, the market's been around for 100 plus years. I think low default rates because it's retail dominated. I always remember back in 2008 that Barney Frank during the financial crisis said the problem was the disconnect between the borrower and the lender. And I think that's what the municipal market actually has, is that close connection because of the exemption. So there's some limitations the exemption presents, but it also creates that better oversight. And as a result, low default rates and a very attractive investment.
States, municipalities, I've been told in the municipal bond market, they issue the money when they need it, not when maybe it's smartest to raise it, like when rates are low. If they have to build a bridge or something like that or a road, that's when they issue the bond. Is that still kind of how it works?
I think you're right. I mean, it's not a very forward-looking market. But to your point, the federal government also doesn't often borrow when rates are low, too, right? So it's not just the state and locals. So I think what I'd like to see, certainly in wake of Los Angeles and the wildfires and the hurricanes in North Carolina we all know about, is that we could have more climate adaptation type of projects. So better infrastructure for flood control, water and sewer, management of wildfires, these types of things, I think are opportunities for the municipal industry to really step forward and start pushing some of these projects.
Dumb that down for me for a second. So does that mean that then you would issue bonds that would be tax exempt, that then you'd use that for disaster prevention?
Well, sure, because in that, so let's say we know the storms, rainstorms we see more rain, they're more frequent, and they're overwhelming existing infrastructure. So really, what I'm saying is just saying to the forward looking is being more attentive to upgrading antiquated infrastructure that we know, the lead pipes and all this type of thing that are around. But I'm very interested in the flood and the water and sewer aspect, because I think that it impacts not only economies, it's important also on utilities to upgrade those. We've seen those with the wildfires, right? The sparks, and whether it's Hawaii or California. So I think that's the opportunity for the industry to say, well, this is a way to upgrade infrastructure, and now to reduce the potential future costs of the federal government through FEMA.
What are some of the sectors that you think will be active issuers in the coming year or two or three?
Well, as I just mentioned, again, I come back, I'm on a drumbeat here. Right,
how about education? Because I'm not sure, that used to be, I felt like a good active area, but I'm not sure anymore.
Well, everyone likes to build schools, right?
Yeah.
They're politically attractive, and it's always about the children, right? So everyone likes to do those, and it's a high percentage of municipal issuance is tied to schools, secondary and elementary and all that. So I think you'll see continue that. I again, coming back to a theme that I think is really focused is, changing weather, increased heat. You've got to improve HVAC systems in these schools in Arizona and all this. And so that's another area of financing. There was in Montana, there was financing for airplanes to fight wildfires.
Yeah,
it's an airplane deal.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we saw them in LA, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about SALT deductions? Like we're like super into looking at those, obviously living in Jersey and New York. How does that influence or change or impact the muni market?
Quite frank, muni market not so much.
Okay.
Really, I mean it's more of our personal interest, right? Yours and mine of having that. So.
But so no changes in terms of the demand for municipal bonds, or okay.
No, I mean it's on the margin type of a thing.
See. Municipal bonds, I'm telling you, it's a thing.
It is a thing.
I'm telling you. I'm a big fan of the municipal bond market.
I think they're great. It's fun. It's a lot of gray area, so it makes it interesting as well, right? It's political, emotional. Wow.
City gets out of the municipal bond underwriting business. Great strategy.
Yeah, it's
City.
not so good.
You got to be kidding me.
What a mistake, right? Huge mistake.
Terrible. Tom Doe, founder and CEO of Municipal Market Analytics, joining us here talking about the municipal bond market. It is a big market, active market, deep market, and Build America Mutual plays a big role in that because they insure a lot of municipal bonds, which gives investors added security and things like that. So we keep an eye on that.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Alix Steele, Paul Sweeney. We are live from the Build America Mutual, BAM Mutual. They are located in Lower Manhattan. We're at their offices today talking about the municipal bond market, which we like to do from time to time. For those of us that live in a high-tax state like New Jersey, for example, the triple tax-free baby equivalent yield is very, very attractive. Peter DeGroot joins us, head of Muni Research for J.P. Morgan. Hey, Peter, one of the big issues, there's a lot of talk about tax reform out there. Is there ever a discussion about addressing or eliminating or adjusting the tax efficiency of municipal bonds?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. In terms of in the municipal bond market, naturally, there is a significant amount of discussion around the potential elimination of the federal tax exemption for interest rate income on municipal bonds, right? This, as the task for Congress, is to come up with a roughly $4.6 trillion bill for the extension of TCJA. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I guess the alarm in the market started when we received a very extensive list from the House Ways and Means Committee, which included about over 100 pay-fors for potential pay-fors for that extension of TCJA. On that list were some far-flung items like the elimination of the mortgage deduction for homeowners, which pretty far-flung, right? Yep. The other, which we thought was, sort of remote, is the elimination of the exemption for federal taxes on for state and local taxes on your federal tax forms, right? Along with those was the elimination of the exemption for tax-exempt interest for state and local bonds, as well as the elimination of the tax exemption, federal tax exemption, for private activity bonds, and a large catch-all for all municipals. So naturally, the market has concern. Historically, when this has come up, and it has come up regularly in pay-fors for different administrations' priorities, these have gotten washed out of later drafts of the bill. And naturally, this isn't in a draft of the bill, right? This was merely a laundry list of potential pay-fors for the extension of TCJA.
But either way, you guys have to be gaming it out a little bit, right? So, like, what would happen to issuance if the tax exemption part went away?
So our view is if the tax exemption went away, it would only be on a prospective basis. So and as we've seen in the 1986 Tax Act, and oh, by the way, as recently as 2017, when TCJA eliminated the tax exemption on tax-exempt advance refunding of tax-exempt debt. Recall in that bill, initially they had the elimination of all private activity bonds, right? Private activity bonds account for about 25% of the municipal bond market, which might also be in play in terms of discussion this time around. But in our view, what we'll likely see is just potentially, like we saw in 2017, a little nipping at the heels of the exemption. So let's say a marginalization of the exemption for municipals going forward, potentially on some sectors like higher education or potentially in healthcare or possibly within some portion of the private activity bond space. So our view is you see lesser or potentially lesser tax-exempt issuance on a go-forward basis. Again, has nothing to do with bonds that are already issued and already held by investors in the market, importantly, right? Distinction. And that ultimately it drives scarcity value in the securities that are currently outstanding in the market. Folks buy muni bonds for two reasons: safety, surety of capital, right? Get your money back. And then two, tax-exempt interest income. We're about the only game in town for tax-exempt interest income. Supply-demand. Supply goes down. Demand remains the same. Prices go up.
Interesting. So one of those drivers you were mentioning was the tax-exempt interest. What's the Is the expectation in your market that this will remain a vibrant market going forward? Because, again, there are some concerns there. Are you seeing any municipalities rush to get into the market, maybe sensing that maybe this exemption may be at risk?
That's an excellent point. Heretofore, we have not seen that. You might anticipate that just in terms of gaming out the probabilities here, even if you expect a wholesale limitation or larger limitation on the tax exemption going forward to be sort of marginal, you would likely, out of prudence, potentially want to get some of that issuance in, pull it forward before the actual legislation is passed, right? Last year, we certainly think we saw some additional issuance as a pull forward before the election. It would make sense now as these sort of milestones are being hit or some of the concerns on the market are being hit, right? We know that tax exemption is on the list now, or at least under consideration. So it might be prudent for some issuers to pull their issuance needs forward to take advantage of the tax exemption while it still exists.
Okay, interesting. I'm curious. We were talking earlier with a guest about the natural disasters and the role that the muni market can play in that. What kind of questions are you getting from your clients about, say, the wildfires in LA?
Well, first of all, that it's a tremendous human tragedy. It's hard to run into somebody in California from the state that doesn't at least know someone who's been impacted. So in terms of the questions that we're getting is naturally from a credit perspective, what might be impacted in the space? So sort of two sides, right? One is that historically, when we've looked at sort of these natural disasters in retrospect, there is very little long-lasting impact from a sustained credit impact on the area after the rebuild. Now, that's historically. Certainly, these LA fires are on a scale that we haven't seen before, right? Most recent estimates insured losses of $30 billion, almost 3x the largest fire that we've seen in California from an insured loss perspective. So today, for example, we saw rating agencies put on notice several credits within the space, including the city of LA, and basically a large number of utilities that do service the area with potential liability depending upon how the causes of the fire are determined over longer periods of time. Right. So, having said that, there has been very little, very few defaults in the market. Right. Limited defaults in the market.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Peter DeGroot, he's head of municipal research at J.P. Morgan, joining us on site here at BAM Mutual in Lower Manhattan as we talk about the municipal bond market here, a large market. But again, there are some issues out there.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Let's go back to the municipal market. We're joined by Nora Wittstruck, Chief Municipal Analytical Officer at S&P Global Ratings. She joins us here on site at Build America Mutual. Nora, thanks so much for joining us here. Assigning ratings, talk to us about the credit quality that you see out there in the municipal bond market. I can't remember the last time we had a Puerto Rico and Illinois. What's going on out there? It seems pretty good.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I would say that, generally in 2025, I like to say that the municipal sector is cautiously stable. Mm-hmm. A lot of state and local governments are coming into 2025 still sort of riding some high liquidity and reserve levels based on the COVID relief.
Still?
Still, yeah. They had to commit it all by the end of last year, but they have to spend it all by the end of 2026. So they still have some in their coffers generally. And I think also just the economy has been pretty good, and that helps state and local governments and other entities that we rate in terms of the demand that they see for their services.
When it comes to something we've been talking about the last hour and a half or so, are the impact of natural disasters and the LA wildfires. How do you deal with ratings and natural disasters like that?
So we bake risk into our ratings, as you might imagine, as credit analysts.
But that probably wasn't on anyone's bingo card.
So in California, particularly in the utilities sector, watching wildfires from a credit risk perspective because of the fact that the state has inverse condemnation, which means utilities, even if they are not negligent, can be liable for sparking a wildfire.
If any of their equipment is involved, even if they didn't cause it.
Yep,
right.
Absolutely. So actually, LADWP, we lowered from AA to AA minus a few years ago because they choose as a decision not to de-energize their lines relative to wildfires. And that's fine for them to do that. It's different than some of their peers in California who do that. But because of that, they decide that because they're based in an urban area, they don't want to shut off their traffic lights. They think that the risk trade-off between the wildfire and human costs are not equal. So we lowered their ratings, and I think part of that is the inverse condemnation, but also it's just the fact that utilities are particularly susceptible to infrastructure damage during a severe weather event, whether it be a wildfire, a hurricane, flooding. So it's all been baked into our ratings. The actions that we took on LADWP were partly reflecting a recalibration of that risk as wildfires have come into more urban areas versus where they historically have occurred in rural communities.
I guess in response to the LA fires, President Trump, I think, has voiced some displeasure with FEMA and even suggesting maybe some of the disaster relief responsibilities at the federal level, FEMA, be put down at the state and local level. Some people think that's a good idea. My question is simply, can states and local municipalities afford that kind of stuff?
Well, we've historically said that FEMA is an important credit support for state and local governments. These disasters are increasing in frequency and increasing in cost. And absent federal aid, that would be a significant pressure for them, and absorbing all of the costs is just probably a little unsustainable at the current rating levels. I think what we are watching for is what he actually decides to do. Does he still decide to maintain the federal aid and shift it to a block grant for states, and then states are responsible for allocating it? Or, does disaster relief go away entirely? Those are two very different dynamics that we have to monitor in terms of how it relates.
What are the different options then for those two scenarios? How would each impact the muni market?
So I think if even a lower level of disaster relief for state and local governments, right now they typically get somewhere between 70 and 90% of the costs reimbursed from the federal government.
Wow.
If that goes to 20%, that's something that we'd have to consider. If that goes to zero, that's a whole nother decision on our part to determine what the liquidity and reserves of state and local governments and entities that we rate need to maintain as a buffer against these types of disasters. Now, if it just shifts from FEMA being the allocator and the distributor of funds to states in terms of a block grant, that probably could be even like a non-concern for us, if you will.
All right. As a credit rating agency, you get paid to worry.
We get paid to worry.
Aside from natural disasters, which can be an overwhelming topic, what are some pedestrian things that concern you?
Well, I think generally we look at long-term liabilities, right? So pensions and how state and local governments and other entities that we rate manage their pension systems. Typically, it's managed at the state level. What does that mean? We are increasingly seeing more people retire. So how do those costs get baked into the budget? States in particular are a safety net for Medicaid, and that's something that President Trump has also spoken about in terms of modifying that plan. States get a lot of money to support people that are vulnerable and need to be in those programs. How could that change the way states function and what they need to allocate resources to? I think we also watch labor productivity and labor workforce dynamics. I think one of the things that we noted after the election is that immigration has been good for our workforce in the U.S. It has really lowered the cost and the tightness of the labor market that has turned into high increases in salaries and personnel costs for state and local governments and entities that we rate. So a major change in border security could tighten that labor market right back up, and that could put additional cost pressures back onto these entities that we rate.
I mean, on the flip side, does it actually take away some of the state aid, though, also?
So it could definitely be a bit of a boost, right? So New York City in particular with asylum seekers had to absorb a significant billions of dollars in additional costs to help those individuals as they come into the city. That could definitely be a bit of a relief valve for them if that were to change. I think, too, there could be some cost savings relative to Medicaid, relative to other social services that they need to participate in to, come survive once they get to the U.S. So that definitely there could be some offsetting improvements in cost savings relative to credit quality.
Maybe you can explain to me how life works Florida.
Yeah, okay, let's do
Texas. No state taxes. How do they build schools and roads and things like that? Because my property taxes are really high.
Yeah.
New Jersey.
I mean, I own a 550 square foot condo, and my property taxes are $10,000 in New York City. So I hear you on that. What happens in states that don't have an income tax? Typically, they securitize other forms of revenue. So they securitize gas taxes, they securitize sales taxes, they securitize property taxes, which is typically the way most state and local governments secure the debt obligations that they have outstanding, is through property taxes. So yeah, you're right. Those taxes are high, and some of it will go to paying off debt obligations for the entities that we rate.
You don't feel good about that?
Yeah, I don't know. Why do I have to pay these high taxes? Everybody's moving to Florida to escape taxes.
It's true. No one likes paying the taxes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, what are some other key things that are that you guys are talking about right now, like on the desk?
Yeah, so I think, we're definitely watching federal policy. We're definitely watching how aspects of affordability cut across all of our sectors. So, I was the housing sector lead before I was the chief analytical officer, and we were watching, the lack of housing inventory and how that was affecting the entities that we rate, like state housing finance agencies and social housing providers, public housing authorities, how they're navigating that particular aspect. But it's playing out everywhere. So water utilities and public power utilities, some of which operate in LA County, we've been watching how they're raising rates to not only pay for deferred maintenance, but also for investment for adaptation to wildfires and other severe weather events. Some have been a little bit lax in doing that because it's been expensive to live in America, right? We've had an inflationary environment. We've had, higher costs associated with food. We've had a higher cost associated with utilities. Insurance premiums are going up for property and casualty insurance. So all of those things are weighing on management teams, and they're looking at how they can dampen those costs as much as possible. So affordability is something that we're really watching. We're also watching, just demographics generally. Our higher education sector has been plagued a little bit. Some institutions have had enrollment trends that are declining, which is a big input to our credit analysis because it generates money for public and private higher education institutions. When those trends decline, they have to figure out how to create revenue other than through tuition and fees. So demographics, the aging aspect of America, people leaving the workforce, people, lower demographic trends of people coming into education providers, all of that is something that can be kind of a disruption to credit quality.
Just got about a minute left. To what extent are you concerned about the tax exemption of municipal debt and perhaps losing that or having that be limited?
I think it really goes back to the question of affordability. So for us, we don't advocate for policies. We only sort of evaluate how the policies play out when we know the details of them. So initially, whether entities issue tax-exempt debt or taxable debt really comes down to the cost of their capital and how that gets baked into property taxes, sales taxes, other types of allocations of resources that state and local governments need to be making towards people, towards pension and OPEB obligations, towards disaster recovery. So if state and local governments, through losing the tax exemption, have to pay higher debt service costs, because they're issuing taxable debt, that is really just going to sort of funnel down to that affordability question and probably result in long-term increases, potentially to property taxes and other taxes that secure debt service obligations.
Nora, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Learned so much. Nora Wittstruck, Chief Municipal Analytical Officer over at S&P Global.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Let's go to more on the muni market because we're right here in Lower Manhattan for BAM Mutual. We're going to dissect all areas of the muni market. Joining us now here on set is Mark Paris, Head of Municipal Bonds over at Invesco. Mark, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Let's pretend like I don't invest in munis, and somebody has been telling me for a while to invest in munis, and then I come to you and I say, hey, what should I invest in munis? What do you tell me?
So I think that the best part about the muni market is it's not what you make, it's what you keep. And so the tax exemption is really key to investors. And I think that the basic concept is that school districts, hospitals, toll roads, they get to invest at a lower interest rate because what they pay is tax exempt and the investor can gross it up. So my advice to investors is you want to have a diversity in your portfolio, whether you create that or a manager creates that. You want to have knowledge of what you own. My kids always joke with me when we go to a town. They say, "Oh, Dad, I know you own the hospital, you own the toll road, you own the university."
But they know what you do. That's so nice.
Well, they're older now, but the idea is that these are things that you can see, touch, feel, drive on, and they're good projects. And as you heard Nora talk about the credit quality of the muni market, it's a fun place to invest in. It's a tax exempt place to invest in. And then if you get into lower credits, then you're going to want a professional money manager to help you out. If you want to go out longer on the curve or things like that. But I would say diversity is important, and I would say that these are the things of essential services that we live and breathe every day.
What are some of the sectors that you guys like these days?
So I think transportation is really a key sector in this country, whether that's a train line in Florida or airports. I always have people come into the city to visit me, and they come through LaGuardia, and they say, "Wow, that place looks so different now." Well, we just redid it.
Oh, man. Yeah, but that was a long time coming, but okay.
That was a long time coming, but now JFK is going through the same process, and they had bonds. So airport bonds, great origination and departure fees, the concessions that go on at the airport. We see that transportation part of the economy is always sort of, humming here in the United States. So that's been a good part of what we do. We also like toll roads. We also like water and sewer. We like to say you wake up in the morning, you turn the lights on, we own the power company. You go to brush your teeth, we own the water company. You get in your car and go to work, we own probably the toll road that you go on. So, we like essential service revenue bonds, but we'll also buy some universities, some hospitals, but that's where you want to do a little bit more credit work.
Okay, right. So I was going to say, where are the riskier parts in the muni market? I mean, clearly, like what you're saying, the infrastructure, tolls, water, like that feels like the safety bet in the muni market from what you're saying. Am I right in that? And then where's the risky bet?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think you have to look at smaller universities these days, universities that are private, that have smaller enrollment, smaller endowment, that are kind of changing their standards to get people in, and that may have too big of a debt load. It's the same thing as in the corporate market. It's a matter of how much leverage a borrower takes on. The hospital sector has been interesting to us because some of them have spent some of their COVID money a little too quickly. But then again, you have hospitals that are doing elective surgeries, hospitals that are in the birthing business that are doing just fine. So, credit work is really important, not just to say I don't like that sector or there's bad news in that sector, but what are the actual individual credits that are going on? We are a finite market. Once an issue comes to market, it's going to trade for a while, then it's probably going to disappear. So it's really important to do individual credit work on some of the different aspects of some of the lower credits.
As an institutional investor in this market, how do you rate the risk of the taxability, losing some of the tax efficiency of this market, whether it's some change in tax laws or anything like that?
So I think it's a headline that we have to watch, but I think the headline is going to outweigh the actual changes that happen. I think there may be some tweaks. I know that the House Ways and Means Committee put it on their list, but it was kind of down the list. And if you look at what they had adjusted for the cost, it was somewhere in between the savings. I think Nora was very on top of things in her answer, where she talked about the fact that other things will go up if that happens. It's a difficult thing to do too, because what do you do with the existing bonds? You probably have to grandfather the existing bonds. You cause a bifurcated market. We saw this before in the muni market, mostly after the global financial crisis. And what we found was there was a really good grassroots effort of school districts and hospitals and universities to say, hey, we don't want to borrow at the higher rates. It's not a good idea. So obviously, in this administration, we're going to have to wait and see how things, kind of play out. But I'm not one of those, folks that's in a panic over it. I think there's going to be a lot more headlines about it, but I just don't see a higher probability of it.
knowing very little about how the muni market works, like, where do issuers usually issue along the curve, and like where is the best value?
So it's interesting that we used to just see long paper, 30-year bullets or 30-year, 10-year calls was really a standard thing to do in the muni market. Separately managed accounts have become such a big part of investors' portfolios, of the products that we offer in the muni business. And so there is a lot of issuance, 0 to 10 years, 5 to 15 years. We actually like sort of the 20-year part of the curve. We think that, the muni curve does have its steepest curve in the fixed income market, and that's because investors want more yield for longer periods of time that they go out, just like they want more yield in more credit risk that they take. But the 20 to 22-year part of the curve to us looks really attractive, both on a percentage to treasury basis and where you get the most bang for your buck while not going all the way out on the curve.
All right, 30 seconds. Are you guys active buyers of new issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes it's 60-40. We do a great job of negotiating with the underwriters and making sure that the issuer understands what our concerns are, whether that be getting a mortgage or a debt service reserve fund. And then we help structure the deals, what type of coupon we want, what type of call they want. So there's a lot of back and forth.
You just don't pick up the phone and take my sales pitch.
No, we don't.
Ah, interesting.
That's cool stuff. Mark, thanks a lot. Really
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it.
Great
Mark
to be
Harris,
here.
head of Municipal Bonds. You were definitely welcome back. He's joining us at Invesco right here at BAM Mutual.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Alix Steele, Paul Sweeney. We are live at the offices of BAM Mutual, Build American Mutual. They're down here in Lower Manhattan. I call it the World Financial Center. I think they now call it Brookfield Place. That's what the kids are calling it. I don't know. We are with the leader of Build American Mutual, BAM Mutual, Sean McCarthy, BAM Mutual CEO. Sean, we've been here coming many, many years. Last year, I think in 2024, there was $500 billion of new issuance in municipal bond market, a record. A, what drove that? And B, what are your expectations for 25?
So first, thanks for being here. It's a really great tradition, and we really enjoy being the host. So last year was a record year at $507 billion, and I think the big driver there, interestingly, was new issuance for infrastructure projects. Okay. So 75%, $335 billion worth of paper that came was for new schools, bridges, tunnels, roads, hospitals. So really essential public purpose infrastructure. And I think that's going to continue. If we look at, as an early indicator, the number of referendums that were approved. In California alone, there were $50 billion worth of school bonds that were approved. Nationwide, there were $100 billion worth of new projects that were approved. So we can see that there's going to be a huge demand for projects that have been deferred in some cases over 10 years. So.
Oh, what about demand? Just in terms of the older the population gets, the more that tax-free incentive might be more interesting to people. Like, what are you guys noticing on demand?
So, for us, we focus, at BAM, we only guarantee municipal bonds. And so I think the real demand, as you've put it, both for separately managed accounts or for direct retail or the big funds, there is a value proposition that was described earlier. In essence, people want more to take home. And so the tax exemption on the bonds serves two real core purposes. First, it lowers the cost to build these essential infrastructure projects. That's critical. The second thing is it provides a tax advantage so that actually investors can feel like they're part of building America.
What percentage of new issuance gets your insurance from Build American Mutual? And is it a need thing? I need your insurance to make it a lower rate? Or?
So no. So basically, what bond insurance does is we're a AA rated company from Standard & Poor's, and so essentially we put our guarantee on a municipality's debt to lower the cost of borrowing. So think about it as you co-signing your kid's student loan. So if you think about it in those terms, you want them to get a job and you want them to pay back their student loan, but if they don't, you're paying. So we acted in that role. We are guaranteeing timely payment of principal and interest when due on the bonds. And so that does two things. It makes investors comfortable that they have liquidity, a higher rating, and it lowers the cost of borrowing for all of these.
And is that widely used by issuers?
So if we think about the overall market for utilization, I'd say it's around 10% of the overall market. But the important thing to think about is that bonds that are rated AA or better don't use bond insurance because they have a strong rating on their own. Yeah. And there's a certain class of bonds that are, lower rated than would be acceptable for the industry. And then there's certain sectors that aren't guaranteed.
So we've been coming here for, 7-9 years, right?
Yeah,
Something like that. What's the biggest change that you've noticed, like in the last decade, in terms of what we cover, what you cover, in the zeitgeist of the muni market?
So I think the muni market's changed quite a bit in the last decade, and it's had a lot of events that it's really addressed handily. So if you think about, for example, COVID, I mean, it feels like COVID was ancient history, but think about that. People stayed at home, so bridges, tunnels, airports, toll roads, just what their utilization was dropped precipitously. And so the market withstood that. There were really, in essence, very few defaults on those transactions. And so what you see happening in the market overall is this, I think, pent-up demand for new projects. I think a lot of people, because of COVID and because of federal monies that were given to them that have now sort of burned off, you can see this pent-up demand to come with your new project at this point and come into the market.
One of the themes that I think we just observed today is kind of the natural disasters and how will that impact the municipal bond market? From your perspective, how do you think that's going to play out? Because it seems to be a thing.
It's a real issue.
Yep.
So think about what BAM does. We spend 99% of our time looking at things that happen not very frequently. One of the things we focus on are natural disasters. So if you think about hurricanes, floods, earthquake risk, and right now wildfires, these are all things that we incorporate into our underwriting process. We evaluate them, and it affects what we guarantee based upon what we think that particular risk is. So we turn deals down if we find that they're in an area that's more prone to exposure to these particular kinds of natural disasters. And we use a lot of analytical tools that are available and some that we've developed ourselves to measure what that severity is. So if you look at Los Angeles, for example, I mean, if you're looking at credits that are county-wide or city-wide in Los Angeles, it's a really big area. The county's 100 square miles. And so even though there's been a couple of terrible fires there, the overall, stability of the county and the city are still quite strong, and they'll have the ability to sort of address this and overcome it.
I can see, though, that being a very quickly evolving, changing topic that must be very difficult to assess.
I think that is true. But remember, the way we look at credit risks, we are guaranteeing the bonds till the last payment is made. So if you have 30-year bonds, the way we look at credit risk is not this sort of shorter cycle.
Sure.
We're looking for, and one of the great strengths of municipal finance is that the issuers and ourselves and the market in itself are aligned, so that the city of Pittsburgh or the city of New York or school districts in local school districts all want to pay, fund their transactions with municipal bonds because it lowers their costs, but they want to pay them back. So, and that's an important thing that, in other kinds of corporate credits, sometimes those interests get misaligned.
Interesting. All right, Sean, thank you so much for taking some time here. Sean McCarthy, he's the CEO, boss around here. We appreciate him having us every year. He's Sean McCarthy, CEO of BAM Mutual. We love coming down here talking about the municipal bond market. There's so many assets and facets to that market, so we always appreciate coming down here.
This is the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 10 a.m. to noon Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.